Alright, for today's industry insight, we're going to be discussing early access and kind of what to expect when entering the platform in today's market compared to how things were at least 3 to 4 years ago. And this is in kind of response to the recent news from Fail Better Games and Sunless Skies not doing as well as Sunless Seas on the early access platform. And early access, similar to Kickstarter, saw a major boom in about, I think it was like 2012, 2013, and has since become a very popular option for game developers. But just like Kickstarter, it has become a case where one, or shall we say, multiple bad apples have spoiled the bunch. And for today's market, gamers have gotten a lot more discerning regarding what games to support on early access, and it's also more important for developers to understand what games work better for the platform and which ones don't. So, as always, for those of you who for somehow don't know what early access is, the early access program on Steam has been a way for developers to sell a video game as a work in progress. You can be on the platform for as little or as long as you want, and when it's done, you can basically flip a switch and your game is considered retail version. And the options or the utility it provides to developers has been amazing. This has been a way for developers to essentially get the money they need to develop a game while they're working on it. And there have been cases of developers going the complete route of Kickstarter to early access to 1.0 and really just building a positive feedback loop of marketing and goodwill for their consumers. Some big examples will of course be Prison Architect, Darkest Dungeon, and even something like Subnautica and Battle Brothers. And like I said, being able to get the money that you would normally have to wait until after the game is out has been a very big advantage for developers who have managed to get through it. But with that said though, early access has certainly changed since its original release. Gone are the days where you can just literally put up your first prototype and say, give me $40 and I'll have this game done in 5 years. With many early access games that have either failed to produce a quality product or even just failed to finish in general, consumers have gotten to the point where a lot of them will just say, screw early access. It doesn't matter how great the game is, it doesn't matter what the positive PR is. If your game has an early access tag, they're not buying. And that is more than within their right. And like I said, when it comes to early access and Kickstarter, the market has shifted. And I want to talk about some of the things to keep an eye out for if you're deciding to launch a game on early access. So the first one is the days of the early prototype are done. Just like with Kickstarter, the bar has been raised so many times that you can't just go on the platform with your very first build. Much like with Kickstarter, you can't go on there with your very first pitch and, just a blank Kickstarter page. But when it comes to early access, consumers expect to see something concrete. They're not expecting to see a game that's 90% of the way done unless you say it. But what I play on your very first early access build should give me more than enough explanation as to what your game's going to be like when it hits 1.0. Now, with that said, of course, this is one of the biggest distinctions between early access today and during its heyday a few years ago. When it came to Prison Architect, who has kind of been bolstered up as the poster child for early access success, when the game was originally put on early access in its original builds, there was very little, if not any kind of gameplay. Fans have talked about how the very first builds, the first 3 or 4 builds of the game, was just you putting buildings up and nothing was happening. But like I said, this was during the early parts of early access. That's a lot of early right there, right? But for today's market, you need to have something for people to see, and more importantly, for them to experience. And it doesn't have to be, again, a fully realized game. I've played titles like Deep Sky Derelicts. I'm trying to think of a few other ones off the top of my head, which is failing me right now. But these were games that were 20 to 25% of the way done in terms of the developer's impressions. But once again, I can see where they're going with it. And one of the big things you really have to worry about when it comes to early access is making those radical shifts. We're talking about removing or adding game-changing systems to your title. Again, when someone buys your game on early access, they're buying it as a known quantity or a known quality. If you, for instance, decide to remove massive systems from your game or add them that completely change how your game is played, you better have a really good reason for doing so. Now, with that said, there have been games that are built and have been marketed as having those big system changes. For instance, Stonehearth. Trying to think, what was that name? Nuts. I can't remember the name of that game. The one from developers of Terraria, which I'm sure everyone's going to post in the comments below right away what the name of that game was. And in this case, the people are expecting to see these changes. And once again, when you load up Stonehearth for when it was first put onto Steam, you had that basics. I can put buildings up. I can watch my little hearthlings run along. And then the rest of it is just getting better from there. Now, when it comes to early access, there are a lot of other topics we can discuss. Namely, how to approach updating your game, and of course when to go to 1.0. But those topics are definitely beyond today's scope. Now, another major point about early access, and sticking with the idea of updates, is when you go on early access, you need to have a plan for your routine updates. Because one of the biggest ways to drive people away from your early access and pretty much doom it is to go dark. And it's very important at the offset, especially in that little early access description box you have on your Steam page, to list how often you update your game. Now, what is the acceptable amount? That depends on the game and the studio in question. Typically, I think most people agree that like 3 weeks to once a month seems to be a good standard. But we've seen some developers go for 2 to 3 months. We've seen some go for 2 weeks. We've even seen a few try to do once a week patches. But again, pick something that you can do consistently. And once you do it, you have to stick to it. Because once you start to fall behind and people start questioning your early access, that can easily lead to a downward spiral effect. And we've seen that crush several early access games in the past, most notably Space Base DF9. Now, another big point about early access is what kind of game fits the model or fits that platform the best. This is the major point between early access and Kickstarter. When it comes to Kickstarter, you can literally pitch any game you want. Do you want it to be a board game, a tabletop collectible card game, MMO, survival, action, roguelike, Metroidvania? We could list them all in the next few hours, I suppose. But the point is, on early access, some genres and designs work better than others. And the first one that most certainly does not work are story-driven games, i.e. a game that has a set limit in terms of the content. The reason why these don't work is that you're essentially showing the player your entire story, but with the game being as worst place possible. And most people aren't going to return to play the same exact story 2, 5, 10, 15 times, depending upon how often you patch. This is typically why games that are built on either replayability, persistence, procedural, or random generation, something that keeps the player coming back, work the best with early access. Because people are going to keep playing these games and they're going to keep digging into them. And that's a major part of why developers go on early access. For that feedback and for essentially getting free bug fixes or free bug testing out of your community. But single player games can work, depending upon, again, the extent of which you're showing the player. And again, there's a lot that can go into that. Most notably, of course, Darkest Dungeon leaving out its final dungeon up until 1.0. And many games will usually save the ending or the real final boss for that 1.0 release, kind of as their way of signaling their main event. In Subnautica, for instance, they wait until 1.0 to basically reveal the final story chain in that game. But again, that goes way beyond our scope. But once again, it's important to figure out if your game is worth it or can it work on early access. But there's even more we can discuss there. There's also when to go on early access. As I said a few minutes ago, most people are expecting the core gameplay loop to be set. But there's also grounds for deciding how far into a game's development should you wait before you go on to it. And again, we've seen developers approach things differently. For instance, Zachtronics and Clay Entertainment, both developers usually wait until their games are pretty far along in terms of their core gameplay loop before they go into early access. With Zachtronics in recent years, games like Infinite Factory, Space Chem, no, I'm sorry, not Space Chem, TIS 100, Shenzhen IO, and Opus Magnum, those games were pretty much done before they went into early access. And the early access period was mainly used as a way for bug fixing and any kind of usability or accessibility options that they wanted to spot. The same goes for a lot of titles from Clay. You get their games and they're mostly done in some cases. Now, recently with Oxygen Not Included, and I assume with their upcoming, I think it's like an action RPG or just an RPG, I'm sure those games are going to have a little bit longer in early access in terms of what's available. But again, when these games are put onto the platform, you're not getting some half-finished prototype. These games are usually either far into alpha or into early beta by the time they get on. Now, with all that said, though, it's time to talk about a major point about early access, and one of the things that you really need to be careful about. And that is, do not go on to early access expecting to fund your game's development. Like I said a few minutes ago, the golden age of early access was developers putting on their very first prototype or their very first alpha build and saying, give me money and this game will be done in 2 to 3 years. You can't do that anymore. In terms of saying, I'm going to put this prototype on, and then the funding will all come from early access, and then I won't need to worry about it. This is a very big gamble, and it's also very mistrusting on the consumer's part. Again, when the consumer sees a game on early access, they expect you to deliver on that. And I know Steam has on their description, this game may have a chance of not being finished, is it an untested game, and so and so. But when you put something up on a storefront, people are expecting, some semblance of goodwill from the developer. And as we've seen with Kickstarters, and with just any time a developer does something bad in general, if you do that, you are essentially signing your own blacklist. Because gamers have a very long memory when it comes to developers screwing them, either in Kickstarter, early access, or even with a 1.0 build, as we've sometimes seen in the past. But the point is, whatever you announce as your goals and your progress for your game in early access, you have to make that assumption that you may not be earning a lot of money with the early access period, especially in today's market with many people being distrusting of early access games. And this can easily lead into a situation where you're banking early access to get your game to a point of being good, but no one's buying the game because the early access state is bad. And you're kind of left in the situation where the money's not coming in and you can't do anything further because you have no money left to keep developing it. And this is easily one of the quickest ways to ruin an early access and ruin your reputation. So, what that means essentially is you need to have the plan beforehand in terms of what you're hoping to get out of early access and what the finished state of your game should be. Now, with that said though, again, with a game like Prison Architect, that was a very unusual case where the success of that game pretty much drove development for, I believe it was like 26 or 28 update builds, which is about just over 2 years of development. And again, without talking to Introversion ourselves, we'll never know how much of that game's development was planned from the get-go and what was augmented thanks to the additional money from early access. But again, the point is, you should have a great idea of what your game wants to be or what you want your game to be at the end of its early access period. And of course, if you do succeed and you get that viral hit, you can certainly look into expanding things. But again, as we talked about with the fast burn syndrome, go too heavily into the throw everything but the kitchen sink approach can easily squander and destroy all that goodwill. But speaking to developers like Tim Keenan, I forget his name from Battle Brothers, and probably a lot more I'm forgetting right now, one of the key points is there has to be an end. And that will take us to our final point for today's industry insight about early access. And this is the one that we should have like up in, a banner behind me. But whatever happens when you go into early access, you have to come off it. And it is very wrong of you to basically say, we'll do it at some point. Consumers don't want to buy a product and then wait 6-7 years for it to get done. And again, the longer we get, the harder it will become to keep that momentum going and keep interest. And this is why one of the most important things you need to decide when you go into early access is how long you should stay on it. Now, of course, with that said, I know an indie developer is about to comment below and I'll beat you to it. Game design is certainly not an exact science. And there is not one developer in this world who can predict when their game's going to come out to the exact day, let alone the exact month or even the exact year. Games get delayed. Development can balloon. But it still doesn't give you the excuse of just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, I don't know when I'm going to be done this game. And it's important, again, when it comes to project management skills, and to understand, okay, I have a list of all of this. If we can get all that done, we're at 1.0. And I've spoken to developers in the past. Most recent, I think, was the developer of Battle Brothers, about how they came up with this list of features and priority to say, okay, this is all the stuff we need to get done. This is all the stuff that would be nice to have. But this side of things, we need this done, do or die, or the game's not going to get released. Now, of course, you can certainly work on games post-early access and following, of course, the big 1.0 reveal. But people expect when you hit that 1.0 marker that the game should be done. It should be done in terms of I am buying a finished game. There should be obviously no placeholder art. There should be nothing that says main quest ending coming soon or anything like that. And people have, I think, actually, here's a question for you folks, and the first one for our vlog for today. Do you think people have gone a lot more critical over games that have gone on early access and hit 1.0 versus games that just released at 1.0 from the get-go? I think they have, because they're basically being given a front row seat to the game's development and all the transparency that goes with it. So if, the train starts to derail and they're starting to see those problems, they're going to be a lot quicker to get off that and, of course, tell their friends. But with that said, we're getting a little bit late here, so let's wrap things up for today. So once again, early access still has use for developers in terms of getting those early eyes, free play testing and bug detection, and of course getting a good read on if people like your game. But both the game has to fit the model, and you as a developer have to become accustomed or accommodating towards this kind of development process. It's not for every game, and it's certainly not for every developer. And it's very important to get all this stuff figured out early before you basically ruin your game and your reputation in the process. Now, I asked this question on our Discord channel, but I want to throw it to you guys as well. Do you still buy early access games? And if so, what qualifiers or things should a developer do in order to gain your trust and hopefully keep it? And of course, conversely, what are some of those red flags that you see, be it from the forum, the website, or just the Steam page in general, that tell you do not support this developer? But with that said, thank you so much for watching today's Industry Insight. If you're new, be sure to check back daily for discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And if you'd like me to cover another topic here, please let me know. But otherwise, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check back around 10 Eastern for regular streaming. If you'd like to suggest games for me to cover or topics to talk about, let me know in the comments below. For a collection of my writings as well as weekly podcasts on design, check out game-wisdom.com. To support the Game Wisdom Patreon, you can find us on there on patreon.com/gwbycer. $1 will get you into our private Discord channel where we talk game topics and more. $5 will get you voting privileges for any major event, including the Saturday Night Grab Bag, Patreon-funded goals, and more. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you enjoy more videos here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel.